Yeah. I mean, I guess I can give my take on it so far
For sure.
if you want to start there.
Yeah.
Um, so I feel like I kind of have to say a lot about this before actually talking about the event itself,
Hmm.
because I think there's some underlying principles that are important to flesh out.
Yeah.
So, like, generally speaking, when it comes to church protest, or I'll even back up farther than that, when it comes to like the right to practice your religion, freedom of religion, and all
Hmm.
that stuff, obviously, I think that's how it should be. Like even I, as an agnostic atheist, as an agnostic atheist running the country, there would be no restrictions
Yeah.
on freedom of religion. Now, there probably are some things I would change that I feel like society is too religious about in terms of like tacit endorsements. So like I might change, like I wouldn't have "In God We Trust" on coins, for example.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have that on licensed places. I might take that out of the national anthem or whatever. Those things like that. But there would be absolutely no restrictions in a perfect world in my imagination of being able to practice your religion. So
Yeah.
that's the first thing.
Yeah.
But with that said, I don't really see it as any different than protesting. Like if somebody was just like eating out at a restaurant and vegans going in to protest, some like meat heavy restaurant.
Hmm.
I don't see those types of protests as all that different in my mind. I just don't think as a society it makes sense to differentiate those things.
Yeah.
Um, with that said, though, I think generally speaking, it's a good to have a rule of like, don't protest inside when people are doing stuff, whether
Yeah.
it's a church service, whether you're eating, whatever. Like, just don't go inside and disrupt what they're doing.
Yeah.
That's my general thing. You can generally go outside.
Hmm.
I think the problem with this is, and I'll probably get more into this is going to be the crux of my video. Although I will say I'm glad I didn't make it yet because there was more things I thought of today.
Yeah.
So now I can add that on. So blessing in disguise,
Yeah.
maybe.
No, absolutely.
Silver lining. But I think this is a perfect example where you have to consider the philosophical fact that sometimes there are things that are morally wrong to do, generally speaking. But when you are forced into specific situations, you have to perform that typically morally wrong action in service of a greater moral standard,
Hmm.
right? So, like, a really obvious of the example of that would be like, if you were in the middle of like Nazi Germany,
Yeah.
right? And like respect law enforcement is a thing. Of course, we should always respect law enforcement as a general hobby.
Yeah.
But when law enforcement starts, and pardon me if I don't know the exact details of Nazi Germany, I'm not trying to offend any Jewish people with this.
Yeah.
But, Nazi Germany, if the guards start going to, people's houses and taking them out and like rounding them up and sending them to concentration camps or however that went down, well, okay, that's a point where like actually we're not going to respect law enforcement because law enforcement is actually um, harming a higher moral standard, which is that, I mean, it's pretty obvious what the higher moral standard is. You
Yeah.
shouldn't put people in gas chambers.
Yep.
And so that's kind of where I'm at with this ICE thing is like, first of all, I don't know if it's been confirmed that David Easterwood actually is a pastor there
Hmm.
and is also the head of ICE. From what I've read so far, it seems like it's like the names match up, but for whatever reason, it didn't seem to be able to be confirmed.
Yeah.
I could be wrong on that, but let's say that's true. I kind of don't blame them for what they're doing,
Hmm.
given how much ICE is doing.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of feel like it's like, yeah, generally speaking, would I want what it's just like bad? Yeah, because I don't want you inside when people are just doing what they're doing. I'd rather have you outside.
Yep.
But in this kind of case, it's like I'm not really sure I can blame these people. I mean, everything I've seen so far from the Renee Good angle was like absolutely insane.
Yep.
Some of the other clips I'm seeing have at the very least made me suspicious. And
Yeah.
ICE is putting themselves in a terrible position where, I don't know. I'm sure you know this about me, but for anybody who will listen to this and don't know this about me, I'm not like the woke lefty. Like I lean left, but I'm the guy who like on the left, so to speak, whenever there's like a police shooting or whenever there's any kind of thing like that, I'm like, we need to wait. We really need to wait because we actually have only seen like 15 seconds of a video and don't know anything about what happened before.
Yeah.
And I did that same thing with the Renee Good stuff, where I was like there were people coming out within the first day or two, and of course I don't have any data on this, but in my head I'm just like, I am willing to bet these people saw like 5 seconds of this and formed an opinion on both
Yeah,
sides,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
And for me, that was like that you shouldn't do that. But the problem is, even with that mindset, the more you like see what ICE is doing, they've just made themselves so untrustworthy.
Mm-hmm.
You can't trust them.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, that's kind of where I'm at. And even I'll just say one last thing on this too. Even the whole thing of like, um, it's still kind of tricky because even the whole thing of like, well, you should protest. Sometimes you have to break your one standard of morals for a higher standard of morals, whatever. Even that's trouble too because not everybody's going to agree on what that is.
Yeah.
If you talk to a vegan, they're going to be like, we should be inside the goddamn kitchen.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like,
Yeah.
we need to be at the farms, like inside. Like these people shouldn't even have jobs here.
Yeah.
Whereas like other people would be like, no, just protest outside.
Yeah.
But still, there is a point where kind of everybody agrees, like, all right, we're not going to do obviously Nazi Germany. And I think, I'm not saying we're in like Nazi Germany right now, but I just can't help wonder if we're getting closer and closer with the ICE situation to like the majority of people just thinking like, look, I normally wouldn't accept this, but this is obviously understandable. But
For sure.
that's just a maybe. I don't know. I
Yeah.
had to look at the polls, but
No.
so that's my perspective. What do you think?
Yeah. So like, obviously there's the greater conversation within the micro, uh, story of this church protest, and I also am fully aware, like I have recorded a video on it. I have kind of given my thoughts on it. You can go and watch it. But I obviously am also aware that it is a subject matter that I am going to have a lot of bias towards, you know what I mean? And so
Sure.
I think that it'd be dumb of me to think that I'm completely objective. However, I do think my experiences as a church leader and as a pastor do give a perspective to this thing that is a little bit different. And so while I'll recognize that I'm not being the most objective, I do think that the experiences that I've had and where I'm at as a church leader, they I think they matter in the context of how I would respond in a video like or how I would respond in a situation like this, or how I would do things like that. But I will say this, like there is a greater conversation about ICE, the train. I mean, like me and you have talked even offline about, the training of these individuals, the motivation of these individuals. I don't know if you saw, there was a news reporter who's like very against ICE that actually submitted herself to the process and like did this half baked, like she gave her resume. It was a legit resume. She did all this stuff and like she never heard back. She had emails that were dumped into junk folders, and then she like checked her email and she had a start date. And so like you can see that the process, and I do think that is objective, like the process of recruiting, training, all of this stuff is like super messed up. Like if you can acknowledge that, then you're a political hack, and you are just you're just trying to cozy up with people that like, you just got to be honest, And so I do think that there's a larger threat. I also addressed the Renee Good situation as well, and I think again you're kind of right in that, where normally you would look at an angle or see a clip and go, all right, there's got to be more here. Well, we've seen enough clips and we've seen enough angles to know that situation is awful, like, and was handled absolutely terribly. And even taking a sympathetic perspective, which I do because, they're both people. And of course, my faith and all of the things of the way I see people, I see people as broken and all this stuff. Like my immediate thought went to, well, all the stories came out about this ICE agent having previous experiences, almost being run over and all this stuff. And I'm looking at that again from this larger lens of like training and going, okay, well, if there is a situation like that, they put people on administrative leave for a reason, like in normal police forces. If you get shot at, you don't go back to work the next day. You know what I mean? Because you're not in a mental space to be able to conduct your duties and do your job in an effective way. And so like that guy should have never even been put in the position to be in that spot, because he, for whatever reason, I'm not saying it justifies it. I'm saying you can understand why the lack of training is this dangerous. You know what I mean? And so I think that that's like the larger question. Getting back into the church thing, which, like I said, I know I have a bias towards. I'm with you where I was like, hey man, if you wanted to, I'm not so crazy to think that anybody violated the law. Like for, the FBI to open up investigations on Don Lemon and for them to arrest some of the protesters and stuff like that. I don't think it's a First Amendment issue for me. I think it's more of like an effectiveness issue. How effective are these things really, truly? Like there's a certain aspect. I was talking to somebody about it, just personally. And I said, there's got to be a certain level of effectiveness because we're talking about it and it is a national headline and it is making waves in that way. So maybe that was the point of it. And I'm not even saying that, and I said this in my video too, I'm not even saying that if this pastor is the head of ICE and is using his office as a pastor, using his influence within his community as a faith leader, if he's using that to do something like this, regardless of your political affiliation, it is wrong to use an office and the mask of faith. We could talk any abuse, whether it's misconduct physically, whether it is assault, whether it is all of these other things. Like it is wrong for pastors to use that authoritative nature of their position to do any sort of wrong. And so like I could understand even protesting the pastor, and I could understand why this was targeted in that way. However, is it effective?
Can I make a comment on that real quick? Do you mind?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So the I think what's interesting about that is I think the person, one of the main protesters or something, or like maybe it was like a leader of like a Black Lives Matter community that just commented or something, but somebody that I think was like higher up, and I really don't know if this is true, but she was actually like a pastor or something, wasn't she? She was also like a clergy member, because she made a comment. I think I'm getting this person right. She made a comment that was like, if you're more bothered, oh man, I should just pull up the quote, but it was like, if you're, let me just pull it up real quick.
No, you're good.
Because it's a direct example. Quote from pastor about ICE church protest. I think I saw this on PBS.
Yeah.
All right, well, it's loading, so you can keep talking. I'll come back.
Yeah, so anyway, like I can understand why from a tactician's kind of standpoint of like, hey, we're gonna go after this. Like I can understand why that church was chosen and all of these things. And again, like I think that's fair. I think the methodology of and again, we can talk about the effectiveness and all that stuff, but the methodology of like going after actual people in the seats, you could make an argument that, well, if they're a part of this church and they know about this pastor and all this stuff, then they're complicit, and so they're just as guilty or whatever. But man, there's something about, and again, this is where my bias kicks in. There's something about me as a pastor that if you can mess with me all you want, come at me all you want as a leader. But when you're just going up to random people, random individuals who are just there, and you're talking about the way they dress. Oh, you're such a, there was the guy who was sitting down and, no, you're such a pretty boy. Look at your clothing, man. You don't actually love Jesus and all this stuff. It's like, well, you don't know any of that. You're just placing the guilt by association. And I'm not saying that it's not there. I'm just saying that you don't know. And so to then be that aggressive towards the entire church, to me, is a line too far. And that's where I was like, man, I just really don't like it. I hated the framing of questions as they were. Don Lemon, is asking people, all this stuff. He's trying to do an interview with the pastor. And again, I don't like, if the pastor's doing that stuff and using his position, I think he should be out of ministry. I think he's disqualified as a leader. So let me just say that. But I will say this, like, for him to incite, when I say chaos, I mean, like, he's trying as the pastor to figure out what the next move is to keep people safe or to keep people, orderly or whatever. And to then try to conduct an interview as if he's going to have, your full attention is like, it's crazy. And then the framing of all of everything I've seen from Don Lemon, the framing is so incredibly bad. And just the way that all the questions have a bend towards them. All the questions have this guise of superiority, trying to tell Christians how to act. And one of my biggest pet peeves, and we've talked about this a little bit, is like, I cannot stand non-Christians telling people how they should enact their faith, telling them, oh, this is the right way to practice your faith. And that to me is just, it's crap. And so, like, seeing that, I'm like, all right, man, like, this is really not good. And I have sympathy for the people who just went to church that morning and had their entire day hijacked. Like, that to me, as a faith leader, it's that sucks. And I hate that. So, like, again, I know that me being a pastor, me being a church leader, obviously I'm going to have a bias towards that, and I'm going to feel that. But anyway, I think that's kind of my initial thoughts on ICE as a whole, but then also some of the things within that protest of the church itself.
Okay, 1 second. I'll probably ask you to repeat the last couple sentences. I'm trying to bring up notes because there was a lot of things I wanted to
Yeah, for sure.
touch on there. Okay. All right, so I found a solution to the echo thing, which is that I have to turn my OBS like all the way down.
Yeah.
But that means when I talk, I have to remember to turn it back up. So anyway, I was going to say, so just before I go further on with this, what were the last? Kind of just wrap up what you were saying. Maybe
basically
one more
what I
time.
was
I just want to
saying.
make sure I'm
Yeah,
paying attention to you.
the last couple sentences were basically just saying, like, I feel for the congregation being targeted
Yeah.
with the pastor because they just went to church that day. They weren't expecting to be interviewed for their politics. They weren't expecting to do that. And I'm not even saying that I would agree with their political views. I'm just saying, like, when you go to church on a Sunday morning, you're not anticipating your service being hijacked. I mean, it literally halted the service and people just went home. You know what I mean? And so for me, that bums me out that people. Again, you could say, oh, well, they're bad people, okay, well, do bad people still have the right to assemble and practice their faith and do all that stuff? Well, yeah, and so and two, the church optically, like, when I was watching this is the last thing I'll say, when I was watching just the videos, it seemed like the church didn't have, some churches have like kids ministries where kids are kind of separated. It looked like that church didn't. It looked like it was like a smaller church. And like, so you have kids, like, could you imagine being, 5, 6, 7 years old and your parents being berated like that? And I know, like, ICE just detained a 5-year-old and all this stuff that like I get it. It's like, well, and this kind of plays into your argument of, well, is one moral, what, I don't know how you phrased it.
So basically, so I could just rephrase again. Basically, sometimes we all have moral standards that we hold ourselves to, but that is always going to come in conflict with other moral standards.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. So, like, So sometimes you have to do something that would be in a perfect society immoral
For sure.
because not doing it would actually be worse because you're causing an actual greater harm,
And
or you're not optimizing the well-being as much as you could.
yeah, and like I said, like I'm aware of that, and I do think that's a valid kind of argument and perspective to bring. And again, so like, all right, even if I concede that point and go, well, there's other things happening to kids, and this is bad. Where I shifted even in that was they started yelling at some of those kids. You know what I mean? Like directing their stuff to them. It's one thing to witness, your parents being yelled at or screamed at or whatever. It's another thing when you have these protesters addressing the children themselves. Like that to me, again, is just kind of a line too far. And again, is it violating a First Amendment right? Probably not. But is it the most effective way? And is that really how you want to portray yourself in the public eye as people are looking at it? I don't think it's good. So that's kind of my general thoughts on it.
Yeah, so this is actually this is really funny. So real quick, my um I have a friend texting me about my content, so I'm gonna tell him I'm streaming on right now.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
I always like to bring friends in on these things when I can.
As a matter of fact, I need to share this because it's live. I'm recording it, but you're live, so I'm gonna share this.
Yep. Okay, yeah. So let me know, and I can kind of go through my what I'm following.
No, go for it.
Okay, so here's something that I'm not 100% confident on this connection here, so take this with a grain of salt. But Nakima, I think that's how you say her name, Levy or Levi Armstrong. Okay. Here's a quote she said. I think this is her. Yeah. Are you ready for this?
Yep.
All right. So when you think about the federal government unleashing barbaric ICE agents upon our community and all the harm that they have caused, to have someone serving as a pastor who oversees these ICE agents is almost unfathomable to me, said Armstrong, who added she is an ordained reverend. And then quoting again, if people are more concerned about someone coming to a church on a Sunday and disrupting business as usual than they are about the atrocities that we are experiencing in our community, then they need to check their theology, and it says the need to check their hearts, but I think it's supposed to be they need to check their hearts. Mm-hmm. So I find that quote interesting.
Yeah.
I think though, I understand what you're saying of like, these people were just doing Sunday service or whatever. It kind of is bummed they want to be interrupted.
Yep.
How effective is it? And what's funny about this is I think is going to be a rare instance where you actually might agree with Sam Harris and I might actually disagree with him, because he did a little 2-minute video on this, and I only watched it once, so I might be getting some of this wrong. But from what I understand, he was basically saying it's just not effective. Like, you shouldn't do it. It's not going to change anybody's mind, yada, yada, yada. And I actually think in the past I would have 100% agreed with that. But I think, and I literally just mean within like the last week, I think I've changed my mind or given more thought to this a little bit, because I don't know how else you're going to do it, in the sense that, like, what opportunity are these protesters going to have to go in and talk to these people and get them to understand how atrocious this is?
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying it's impossible.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not saying you can't like try to go in and maybe have a one-on-one conversation. Should they have tried that first? Maybe. But what if they say no? What if they're like, no, I don't want to talk about it?
Yeah.
Then you're kind of forced into a situation where it's like, well, actually, morally, the best thing to do in this situation might actually be to psychologically shock them. I mean, you don't want to traumatize anybody, but, shock them and be like, wow, that was really annoying. Give them a day they'll never forget.
Yeah.
Because the reality is, days that you never forget them. And so even if you don't like them, it's still going to be in your head what they said.
Yeah.
Now, in some instances, that's going to make you reinforce your perspective even more.
Mm-hmm.
But in other instances, I think there may be some cases where, like, whether it's in a week, in a month, in a couple years, you can hearken back to that moment of like, wow, I never thought of it that way before. I can't believe somebody is this passionate about this. Maybe I actually am wrong about something.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those things where, like, I get what you're saying, but at the same time, I'm not convinced fully that it won't work. And so what I mean by that is like there maybe could have been a better way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure of that. I'm kind of maybe should they have tried it? Yeah, maybe. But again, I have empathy for what they're saying and what they're doing.
Yeah.
Um, but
Well,
yeah, it's just real quick.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
I don't, and this kind of touches on something else you said too of like you hate when non-believers tell Christians, how they should practice their faith.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that's I understand where you're coming from, but the reality is I think we kind of all should do that to each other no matter what. If you're
Mm-hmm.
going to set out a principle of how you think you should act, how you think you should behave, whatever it is, and then you go and you don't do those things, I think it's perfectly rational for a believer or a non-believer to say, well, you're not holding yourself up to your moral principles.
Mm.
I mean, I would expect this from you, from anybody in my family, my friends. If I go out and I say like, I tell them like, hey, I'm really big into telling the truth. That's something that I hold like really is a big deal. And then they'd catch me lying. Even if they don't care about lying that much, I mean, it wouldn't feel quite as good, but
Yeah.
I would want them to say, hey, you're not doing what you said you were going to do. You know what I mean? So if
Yeah.
like if you cite if you're constantly in church and citing passages about, Jesus helping the poor, Jesus, caring for the meek, caring for the whatever population that, isn't always cared about.
Yep.
And then you're like, well, actually, I don't think that we should give a shit about them and they just need to work harder and I'm never going to donate to them. Well, it's like, I think everyone has a right to say like, well, that's totally contradictory to the messages that you're receiving and talking about day to day.
Yeah.
So I don't quite agree with that. And then so going back to the ICE stuff though, I think the ICE thing is really that whole thing you said about the officer being in an instant before where he was like dragged or
Yeah.
something. So I never read about that, but I heard about that. And
Mm-hmm.
if that's true, I just thought like in the least, it's one of those things. It's like, oh my God, that's so funny, but like in the least funny way. Because, and not that every right winger thinks like this, but I think if you're on the right typically or vote conservative, you're on the side of this ICE officer, and you also think that like mental health treatment is woke or whatever the fuck, or therapy is woke or whatever the fuck, like, I'm sorry, you can't hold those two things at the same time in this incident, right?
Yeah.
Because the officer that shot Renee Good, if he was traumatized by the previous shooting, don't you think therapy could have helped that guy a little bit?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like you can't hold these two. It's difficult for me intellectually for someone to say, if they were to say that they can hold those two beliefs at the same time. It
Yeah.
just that doesn't make sense to me. And then the last thing I was going to say, when you're talking about the ICE stuff with the shooter or whatever, I think the big thing for me was like you were talking about how the training, they should never have been in that position, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't look into that as much as you did, but that is a theme I think that we both agree on overall.
Definitely.
Because my big thing with that shooting is why the fuck was that cop or agent in front of the car? Why? It made zero sense to even put yourself in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
0 cents.
Mm-hmm.
Because why could he have not swung wider, right? Like the car's right here and he's like here. Like he's like here. And it's like, why are you not like to get out of the way? And it's just like, and that goes back to like, what's their training? And then the guy's camera is out and it's like, why? Is this really necessary? Like cognitively, I mean, I'm no neuroscientist, but I would imagine when you're trying to do this with one hand, you've got a gun ready in another, and you're close to a car. Like that's just the human brain is just going to be at some point, the ability of it is going to be
Yeah.
minimalized, the more actions you force it to take on.
Well, and
So it's like,
yeah.
why hold the phone? Why put yourself in that situation? And the only thing that I think that would change my mind on this is if someone could somehow show me that there was like an ICE agent in front that she was heading towards. And even then, it's like, was shooting her the best thing? Because I mean, I don't know anything about this, but I just cannot imagine that shooting someone who has their foot on a pedal makes any sense. Because it's not like you shoot them and then the car disengages.
Yeah, it didn't.
It rolls.
Yeah.
And even it probably even rolls, I would guess, with even less predictability.
That's exactly it.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like it's just it's
Which,
but yeah.
which
Yeah,
again,
so
which again is I'm not saying necessarily that I'm sympathetic towards people who are doing things that I I I would assume are unconstitutional. Like, I can't imagine that this is how this is supposed to be happening. You know what I mean? But at the same time, I don't know anything about like police work or anything like that. But anyway, but like I was talking about it with my wife, and on a certain level, I feel like some of these agents are victims in and of themselves because. And don't, I'm not saying that as an excuse. I'm just saying I think it's a way to understand why we're experiencing some of the problems that we're experiencing, and why there's so much of the even you know, I know it's impossible to do, but even taking away the catastrophic physical ramifications, like death and other things, like I just see just the way that there's the hostility even in basic interactions. It seems like, and I can't help but think that there's just such a lack of reinforcement, training, help for these agents, that they are trying to do the best thing that they know how to do. And I think it's genuinely a scary position to be in, to have that much authority, to have that much expectation, and then to have such little training and such little direction of like, oh, this is my job, this is what I'm supposed to do. And again, I think that's where that is. I did want
yeah,
to
but these guys could quit at any time though. I mean, it's
uh
not like they can't unless it's like a military thing where
that's
they
the
have some
thing. I
contract where they
think
say
like
you can't quit.
there's sometimes with federal contracts like that, I think you're kind of locked. I don't know. I've heard that that's the case, but I don't know. Um,
Even then, though, couldn't you make an argument that a dishonorable discharge would be more of like the morally right thing to do?
I
I mean,
think you
it's
could. I
I just
mean, definitely. I think you
I
could make
just
that
I
argument for
think
sure.
yeah, I don't mean to cut you off. I
No,
just
you're
think,
good.
and this is I think this is one thing I actually forgot to say at the end of my last point. Um, the the big issue here is like I 100% agree with what you're saying, but I think when you're talking about like empathy towards these officers and towards the training or whatever, I think it's valid for sure. And I think there is a piece of that that I think we do need to understand because
Yeah.
I think like if you were to talk to an ICE officer and you wanted to convince them to quit, probably going up to them and saying like, fuck you, I hate you, get out of here is going to be less effective than if you like genuinely sat them down with a group of guys that
Yeah.
they were friends with
Yeah.
and like empathized with them and had a good conversation. So you had to combine that, but the issue is you can sometimes leak into like that empathy changing the narrative into being too soft on them.
Oh,
So I know what you're
for
saying, and I'm
sure.
not saying you're saying that.
Yeah, I know.
I'm just like that is just a red flag to me
It
in
definitely
general
can
with these
be.
conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't mean to cut you off, and
No,
I'm
you're good.
really gonna try to the rest of the way.
No,
I
you're
just felt
fine.
that was important too, so I just feel like I needed to, but continue.
No, I definitely, and I'm aware of that, as far as like I understand how that could probably come across or sound. And I'm not trying to do a both sidesism. But at the same time, I do think it's important in understanding, again, with me being a pastor, I'm always going to care for people. And you know, one of the constant themes throughout scripture, I'm not going to, this isn't like a Bible debate, but like one of the constant themes throughout scripture
We
is
can make
that
it one if you want.
one of the constant themes throughout scripture is that, you know, God cares about the oppressed and the oppressor. And and so that, again, just understanding that, like, hey, I can acknowledge that there's some real dysfunction happening within the way that these things are being brought out, while also saying, hey, I want to slow down and make sure that you can dehumanize people on the left, and you could make an argument that that's actually what's happening with some of these raids and enforcements and different things like that, where people are just being dehumanized. But you can also dehumanize other people as well, in the oppressor, and that's how you end up with like what they did after World War II, where there were Nazis who went on trial and faced death penalties and all this stuff. And I just, again, I think that it's something that I'm aware of, but at the same time, I'm not going to shy away from, just because that's what I feel like I'm called to do. There was a couple things though at the beginning of what you were talking about with quoting the faith leader who kind of organized the protest, and it kind of brings a larger thing of, even theologically, and we've had this discussion too about there is a correct way to kind of study scripture, and that is how you boil things down to, hey, this is probably a more accurate or more correct way of viewing a passage versus taking it out of context and applying it in all these different ways. I would be interested to see where that leader is affiliated and where her credentials are and what kind of denomination she's from. Because to me, even just hearing the quote, it sounds very progressive, not politically. I mean, there's obviously a lean there, but it sounds progressive even theologically in the way that they're applying the scriptures and applying the text to different things. And so for me, it causes a little bit of hesitation for me to just accept that and go, oh, well, that's one of us, or that's a faith leader, because I don't see myself as, locking arms with like progressive Christians, and so like for me, I would not say that is a correct form of Christianity. And when I say correct, I mean, like, you can practice whatever, you can believe whatever you want to believe, but like, I also have the ability to say that's actually a false version of Christianity and of faith. And so, again, like, I think theologically there's a little bit of hesitation for me to just hear faith leader. I mean, Renee Good was married to a woman, and she talked about her Christian missionary trips and all of this stuff, and to me, I'm like, okay, well that's great, and that's good that there's some good done, but as far as like attaching it to faith in a way as to say, oh yeah, that's the same faith that I hold to. I don't see myself as like linking arms with them theologically and in our faith. So there's a lot of people that have that kind of brand of, kind of this postmodern Christianity, where they're still holding on to their faith or some sort of spirituality, but they lack the teeth.
You sound like Jordan Peterson. He always talks about postmodern. That was his thing. I don't know how much you followed him, but he was always he was always hating on postmodernism just in general.
And yeah, like, I think just moving past the traditions of faith. And so anyway, that's kind of that. And I do think, to the other point that you made too, was like, hey, we should all on some level hold each other accountable for different things. And I do think that's correct. And we should. And there is an element of like, I'm trying to show people the way that I believe is the correct way to live your life and to do all of this stuff. We've had plenty of conversations about why I think the biblical worldview, the Christian framework, is the best and all this stuff. So there is an element that we're all doing that on some level. But again, I think when you're like, even the example that you used about like, if you were lying, that other people would come alongside and say, hey, you said this, so where are you at with it and all that stuff. I think the key in all of these examples, and I think you would be hard pressed to find an effective example without this, the key is the relationship that you have with people. You have to have some level of tangible relationship. And I'm not saying like your best friend or your family member, and you have to be like super interconnected. I'm saying there has to be some level of relationship to be able to hold people accountable, to be able to show people.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that at all, actually. I mean, I mean, you're a Christian and I'm not, and obviously we're close to some degree.
Yeah,
but we're also very not close in terms of the things we think are important.
Yeah,
theologically.
Yeah,
I don't think it would be any kind of wrong for me to notice if if we had 3 debates and you're constantly saying the same thing about how you want to live your Christian life. Not only do I see it as morally wrong, I see it as almost like a moral duty for me to say, like, if you're doing something other than what you said, to say that's not what you're following. And even for me, and you could even call that for me in reverse. If I did something that was like, well, if and you were like, well, you're kind of acting like Christian, whatever
Mm-hmm.
that would mean. Yet you say you don't believe. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah. But
I mean,
show.
that's something that not to make this. Um, this isn't maybe not exactly the same thing, but Jordan Peterson does that all the time
Mm-hmm.
with atheists.
Mm-hmm.
Is he'll say, "Yeah, you'll say you're an atheist, but you don't act like an atheist."
Yeah.
And we can talk about like whether or not that's like justified or not, um, or whether he's right or not. But the point I'm trying to make is I don't think it's wrong for anyone, no matter how close they are, to simply make an observation about behavior A, and then make an observation about behavior B, and then say these two things don't line up.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's exactly. Is that not what you're doing with someone? I actually think you're kind of doing this when you say that people that are Christians who aren't actually Christians proclaiming that they have the right thing to do,
Mm-hmm.
right? If a Christian came along and said like I believe Jesus taught X Y Z,
Mm-hmm.
and you were like, well, no, that's not Christianity.
Yeah.
That's very similar to what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think you can hold to the view at the same time that you said at first, which is we shouldn't be critiquing people for non-believers shouldn't tell believers how they should have faith, or believers shouldn't tell other believers. I know you didn't say
Well,
that,
most
but
of the time, here's what I'm saying, and this is why I think relationship is a key in that thing. Because we've talked about it. Like you watch a YouTube show like Jubilee, and you see the surrounded video. Like how many of those things are actually effective in changing people? You have to have a level of relationship to experience change within like being able to see the outcome that you want when you bring up the things. So like for example, like even with us, like we aren't as close and we do think it very differently, but even then we've been on multiple calls, we text each other often. And so there is a level of relationship. When somebody comes into a church, there is a natural level of relationship just by the acknowledgement of coming into the body of Christ, coming into fellowship and that kind of stuff. So that's where like preaching, even if I don't know every person who's sitting in the seat, there's a level of relationship because there's the submission to the church authority, and there's the submission to being able to kind of be together in fellowship. And so again, that's what I'm saying. Like you have to have at least a little bit of a baseline of relationship. That's why when I look at a Minnesota protest in the church, I'm like, there is no relationship with anything there. So why, like, you're just what you're ending up doing is talking way over each other, and you're not actually being beneficial. And most of the time too, and this isn't a personal thing, but a lot of times when you have Christians, like I said, like you have these different sects of like a progressive Christian versus like a conservative Christian, and somebody who holds more of like a traditional framework of scripture and things. Most of the time they're speaking out of some level of ignorance. They're speaking out of some level of, I think this is how Christianity should function. I think this is how you should behave and believe as a Christian. But most of the time, those are just presuppositions, and they're not actually correct when you actually dig in and go, okay, even if I took your advice, the framework of what you're trying to suggest isn't correct. You know what I mean? So
so
like,
that's entirely different though than someone saying, I would agree if I knew nothing about Christianity, like zero about it, and
mhm.
then just randomly told someone, "Oh, this is my idea of Christianity, you're not holding up to it." That's wrong. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about you directly tell me, so let's say you just tell me literally once, like one time, you're like, "I think it's important to give to the poor,"
Yep.
right? And then I see in a week there's a news headline that, for well, assume there's no good reason for it. For no good reason, you went against your own church saying, no, we're not going to give this money to people in the poor.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to know you to know that you're contradicting yourself there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what you're talking about is effectiveness in the sense of and to some degree, not just effectiveness, but even the ability to call someone out. Because you're right. Someone who does know a Christian, knows Christianity, and then calls someone out is going, they're going to church or they're having conversations like you do. That's going to be more more palatable.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily think that's always necessary. Like if someone says, "Oh," I mean, the classic example of this is with like with people who are pro-life and they say they really care about children,
Yeah.
right? But then as soon as they're born, maybe they vote against every single policy that would really help children.
Yeah.
That's a direct example of like, I don't think I need to know much more about what your faith is. If you directly tell me a direct statement like, I really care about children throughout the entirety of their lives, and that includes before or at the moment of contraception, I'd be like, okay, cool. But then if after contraception and after birth you start to not care, I mean that just is a contradiction.
Yeah.
Like you know what I mean? I mean it just is.
Well, yeah, and maybe we're getting off on a little bit of a side note. I do think it's important. But one of the other things too, like I said, is like most people don't actually know what they're talking about, or they're just looking at what you're looking at, which is like, oh, you voted a certain way, so that means you don't care. When the
Well, hang on. Hang on. I'm not just saying that just you voted. I'm saying that like
that's the
somebody
example you
direct.
used.
That is the example I used,
Yeah,
but
you used a
I
voting
tried to
record.
caveat it. And I know I'll caveat it again though.
Yes.
Well, I'm not saying some guy just randomly flippantly saying like, "Oh, you said you care about children, but then you voted against the child tax care credit. That means you're not actually a Christian." I'm not talking about that.
Okay.
I'm talking about like they say they're again for like feeding the poor or something, and then objectively speaking, a policy comes along that no matter how much you read about it or look about it, they just are against feeding the poor in service of like, I don't know, making their church look more beautiful or something.
Okay.
Like that's just like that's an instance where like objectively speaking, and goes back to what I was saying before. I think non-believers can critique Christians and that be just fine. Now, I think I would probably agree with you that the way that happens generally isn't the most productive.
Yeah.
So I think we actually have a lot of agreement here.
Yeah.
Because me critiquing Christianity is going to be way different than some Joe Schmo that just doesn't do any critical thinking about Christianity at all. Because I think you'd probably give me credit that even as much as I'm against Christianity, it's not like I'm not thinking about it.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
not like I'm not considering art. You know what I mean? So I think we agree that, like, I would just have a hard time. Like, I hate to make these kind of statements, but I actually don't think you think this, because I don't think you think that I can't make a critique of Christianity that isn't valid just because I'm a non-believer, or I can't make a critique of like how Christians are acting. I don't think that makes any sense at all. I think as long as you have the caveat that I've done critical thinking about it, I've done research about it, et cetera, I think it's totally fine. And that happens all the time. I mean, that literally is what it means to critique systems, to critique friends, to critique people we know on the street. Is you just obviously, if you should know what you're talking about. You shouldn't just flippantly critique them based on like a TikTok style analysis, right? To make it kind of a funny frame.
Yeah.
But if you're analyzing what they say and you still disagree, well then I don't see anything wrong with that.
Yeah.
In fact, not doing that would be counterproductive.
Okay. Well, I mean, like, I think it's unproductive in general, because like most, like, I'm not gonna take any theology or any insight from somebody who doesn't believe the book I believe. You know what I mean? Like that. It's
Wait, why?
because, like I
I
said,
mean, theology.
because, like I said, like most of the time, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that like you have to be in the strict theological lane that I am. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there has to be some level of agreement on some things, because without that, there's no validity. Like what I said earlier, like a progressive Christian has such a different theological framework, and a lot of it is based on presuppositions or misuses of scripture, or I think it's just I think Christian progressivism, like, I would assume that quote from that faith leader, without seeing it, without knowing it, I'm going to assume that that's a progressive Christian. And so it's like most of the time their exegesis, their hermeneutic of how they study scripture is garbage. So like I'm not listening to them. I'm not listening to that. For somebody to not know some of the basic tenets of faith and then try to critique it, I'm not listening to that. And it's like I think people just need to stay in their lanes more. Is what I'm trying to say, because most of the time, like I said, like most of the time they don't understand that Christians are actually are doing a lot of the things that they're trying to critique people for. They're trying to say, oh well, Christians aren't doing this and they're not doing this. Most of the time, that's not even true, and so that's where
How
I'm.
is that not? How is that not exactly what you're doing by critiquing Renee Good's Christianity? Because you're saying she has a theological view that's wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and she would probably say you would say that about her. She might say the same thing about you.
Yeah,
So
but
there's an underlying
so
assumption there that
here's the
whatever.
and again
Hey,
this.
hey, real quick, real quick. I assume that
Okay.
obviously whatever you're going to assume under that whatever your theological view is right, and there's some kind of like maybe not objective but near objective way of viewing theology that if you don't fall under, you just shouldn't be taken seriously. So I understand what
Absolutely.
you're saying there, but like
Yeah,
I'm not sure. I don't know how you could ever grow intellectually without and this is take this as a question because I'm not saying you're saying this,
for sure.
but like would like if you're going to deny now this is a little bit different because this is historicity and not theology,
Mm-hmm.
but if you would deny the perspective of someone like Bart Ehrman, for example, on the historicity of the Bible
Mm-hmm.
or the New Testament or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, I mean that would just be silly to not even consider what he's saying. I mean he's one of like the, as far as I understand, one of the leading New Testament scholars.
Mm-hmm.
So it just sounds like to me like you're shutting out perspectives that could change your mind, and I'm not sure why you would do that.
Mm. No, it's not that. It's not that I'm not. It's not that I don't listen to it. Like I said, it's like I think people get offended when you don't. And this might go back all the way back to what I was originally trying to say. I think people get offended naturally when you're not listening to them. So, like for example, those protesters, and I'm trying to bring it back to the original
Yeah.
kind of thing that we were doing. These protesters who go in and try to protest this church. Like to think that that's going to be effective in changing the perspective of those people is it's not going to work. And
Well, that might not be their goal too.
yeah, like I said, and
You know
we
what I
could
mean?
talk there's a certain level of effectiveness because we're talking about it and it's made national headlines and all of that stuff,
Yeah.
which is what I said at the beginning. um and that's what I'm saying is like anybody has the right to say anything, and people have opinions on everything, and I think that's one of the I think it's a beautiful thing about like online connectivity, social media, and that kind of stuff. It's also very annoying because everybody has opinions about everything, and some people don't know what they're actually talking about. And so like I think that's where I can get really really frustrated. And there has to be, again, this is where I'm coming from, there has to be the commonality, there has to be some level of relationship. I would listen to you more than I would listen to other non-believers, especially non-believers who would be like in a comment section or something, because there's no relationship. I have zero desire to listen and learn from somebody I have no relationship with.
I 100% know what you mean because um, I mean, there is a certain aspect of like, I feel like we probably both see this in each other.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a way. I think we're both open to critical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
In I would say for you, in most cases, I have question about your theological critical thinking sometimes or historical critical thinking.
Yeah.
But the point I'm trying to make is that base level of trust that we have of like this is I'll just put it this way.
Mm-hmm.
I think we both know we're taking things seriously
Yeah.
and we're not taking things flippantly or for granted.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. We both have some of the same principles outside of religion that are like, the TikTok news style is bad.
Yeah.
The style of I'm just gonna have my opinion based off of 5-second video I saw.
Yep.
That's bad. So I just say that to say I empathize with what you're saying for
Yeah.
sure. So
Yeah, for sure. No, it's like I said, it's really good. I just that's something that I just am in a spot where, like I said, it's just difficult to like. I think it's just unproductive to try to lecture um, people on you're not doing it right, or you're not. Now it's one thing to say like, okay, somebody's practicing a faith that I don't believe in. Like I feel like, okay, let's have the conversation there, because again, there's the commonality of some sort of faith that's happening, and again, whether it's valid or not, I think that there's some commonality there. I think again, it's just the concept of that there comes with a lot. Hold on, I'm trying to say this. People
You're good.
most of the time, generally speaking, bring presuppositions and an expectation that every Christian or every church or every faith is supposed to do these certain things. And it's just, I don't want to be in a spot where anybody is in that space. You know what I mean? Christian or
I think the
not.
reality is we don't know what the protesters know, though. I think that
Yeah,
at
for
the end of
sure.
the day,
No,
I think
absolutely.
the
That's
truth
true too.
is no, because at the end of the day, like if you found out that the protesters knew a lot about what the church was teaching, like I guess here's a good question for you:
Yeah.
if you found out that the protesters knew, like, did an extensive study
Hmm.
on what the church believed, what they saw they believed, and let's say the church said they were all for helping, even your immigrant neighbor or
Yeah.
something. And then they noticed that this guy, again, I don't know if this is true or not, but then they did think for whatever reason that David Easterwood was the head of ICE and a pastor. Would you then think differently of it? Because
I
that's an instance where they know they're not just going in with presuppositions.
yeah, yeah.
They're going in with really what's just facts.
Well, and that's why I say like I really don't have a problem with them protesting the church or the pastor, especially if he's doing that. I think that's wrong, and I think it's a disqualification of being a pastor. You know what I mean? To use your office, to use a faith position to then push a political agenda is wrong, regardless of where it is. Again, I think the line for me is, even if people are complicit and maybe they know their pastor is a part of this or whatever, I think that's where I'm like, man, I don't know that I would want to go after every single person who's sitting in that church. Um, but I mean, like I said, like I think if that is the case, and he is using his church in that way, it's wrong. Like I would hope
Yeah.
that people
So,
wouldn't go to that church. You know what I mean?
so again,
Um,
I know we're in a hypothetical, like
y-
this is like an extreme
for sure, for
hypothetical
sure,
at
for
this
sure.
point. But I'm just kind of testing your principle on this.
Yeah,
So let's say, and I think this would maybe be even impossible to find out unless you had a church of like 5 people or something.
yeah.
But let's say theoretically, there's no kids; it's all adults.
Hmm.
The protesters know what every single one of those people think in
Yeah,
there, and they know that they are preaching about being pro help your immigrant neighbor,
yeah,
but then they also have an ICE pastor.
yeah.
In that instance, would you say like, okay, yeah, what they're doing is fine?
Well, yeah, I mean, like probably yes, just because I don't feel like that's a church anymore. You know, when I was talking about like this commonality and this like this thing of looking at one another and all of this stuff, I talked about it from a progressive end, but I also see it on a conservative end too. And so if people are using their church to push political agendas, and that becomes kind of the priority of the church, I don't even see that as a church. So in the going all the way back to the example you had with like vegans, protesting steakhouses, like I would see that as the same. I wouldn't see that as like, oh, that's a church. That's my brother and sister in Christ who are doing these. No, I don't think that I would have a much of a problem with that, because I wouldn't see that as like a legitimate, you know, gathering of
Okay,
of
so
of
so,
real
so you
believers.
so do
If
you
if in that
see?
yeah, if in that scenario, like they know everybody is doing that, everybody believes that. Super hypothetical. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's that. Yeah,
So so then it sounds like you think that the um, church protest should be put on, or I'm sorry, let me reword this.
yeah.
Church services, masses, whatever,
Hmm.
those should be put on a legal or moral pedestal above just like interrupting a vegan steakhouse or something, or a steakhouse as a vegan.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't know, like I wouldn't know constitutional law, but like at what point does your First Amendment right to assemble and protest violate somebody else's First Amendment right to religion and gathering? And so, I don't know what that would look like. But I do think, and again, I
Well, I'm
know,
asking your legal, just real quick, I'm asking your legal ideal, not what you know about the law
yeah, I
currently.
would
I'm
like,
saying that as
yes,
a
yes, yeah,
society, should we elevate
yeah, I would
a
like
church
for,
service over?
I would like for gatherings of believers. I would like for religious gatherings to be protected from entering into the service, and I would actually even say that to people who have other faiths as well. Like um, there should be some level of protection. And when I say other faiths and other religions, I'm again in the same way that I'm saying like, hey, there's this gathering of believers is kind of outside of the tradition. I would say like, okay, so like for Islam, for like, a radical jihadist, you don't get like that protection in gathering. You know what I mean? But like,
Yeah,
you
sure.
know what I'm saying? So like, but I would love to see that be protected for people, to be able to gather. I don't have a problem with them being outside, and I don't have a problem with them, uh, as they're walking into church, addressing people. Like I don't have a problem with that. And I think had it stayed outside, I wouldn't have even probably had a problem with them following them to their cars. I think it was for me, it's the progression of go in, interrupt the service. They have to now leave because you've wrecked the plan that they've had, and then you follow them out, and then you
So
address
that,
the
yeah.
children, and it's the
So,
progression of like all of this stacks on one another, and I'm like, oh, I don't know about that.
so you see it as different than just like interrupting a steakhouse then? Do you think legally we should have harsher punishments for interrupting a church service than
I don't think
interrupting a
punishment.
night out?
Like I don't think like I said earlier, like I don't think the FBI should have gone after these protesters because I don't think they were in violation of anything.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah,
Let me be a little more direct with what I'm saying. Our
yeah,
laws reflect moral standards of a society, and so I think if we have a law that says they're going to be, and I don't know if it exists this way. Again, this is hypothetical. If we
yeah,
have a law that says church interrupting a church service is a higher punishment than interrupting a night out at dinner or whatever, I think that would be essentially you're leaking into area in an area where you're not separating church and state, and I think that's not a road we want to go down. So
hmm,
I would have no problem with like if you interrupt a church service and the cops come and get you, and this is just hypothetical. I would have to think about what kind of punishments should be deserved for this kind of thing. But
yeah,
if you, let's just say hypothetically, you interrupted a church service, they took you out and they gave you a $200 fine or
yeah,
something or whatever. Um, I would be fine if that fine was also the same for a couple interrupting or protesting at a restaurant and they
yeah, yeah,
also get fined $200.
yeah,
I think where I would start to have a problem with it is if the law reflected reality such that when you interrupted a church service, you went to jail for 2 weeks and paid $1,000 fine. But then if you did the exact same thing at a night out, you would only get a $200 fine.
hmm,
So what I'm trying to ask is like, do you agree with that? Or do you think that like interrupting a church service should be elevated above other types of private event disruption?
man, I don't know.
That's okay. That's
Yeah,
fine.
I don't know. Like I want to say that I would be more apt to agree with like, hey, let's make sure that we're taking care of people on level playing field, whether they're, I used to work at a Texas Roadhouse, and there was a guy that was asking for money, and we ended up calling the cops and having him removed and all that stuff. Like, I would see it the same. I think if like, I had to pick one, I think I would want to see some universal thing of any, you know, private gathering or like a
Yeah.
restaurant or a business or whatever. I think I would want to see that there. But again, like I said, at what point does that then impede on a First Amendment right? And so it's like, it's just it's very very tricky. But yeah, I think it's like I said. I'm not even arguing for the legality of it. I just think it's a bummer as a pastor, as a church leader, to see people who went in to go to church have to get pushed out because their pastor was a knucklehead. You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah. So that's interesting that you said that, because that was going to be kind of my last question to wrap all this up.
For
Was,
sure.
or not? We didn't have to wrap it all up, but
No, you're
like
good.
an important question was the that whole idea about narrative that I was speaking about earlier,
Hmm.
because I think the way you ended that is super important, because there's two ways to simplify it, two ways to end that sentence. You can say it's a shame that these pastor or these church members had to get kicked out because of some woke left, you wouldn't say this, but it's because of some woke left protesters. That's way different of a statement than it's a shame that they had to get kicked out because of their pastor allegedly being an ICE member.
Yeah.
Like, those narratives, I think, are completely different, because one kind of blames the protesters and the other puts the onus more on the fact that the ICE guy was a pastor. Now,
Well,
you can even say the ICE, like, you can even have the second narrative, which, with recognizing that, like, there's a complicated conversation about how justified this was and whatnot. Even though I already shared my perspective on that. But
yeah, and that is kind of what I'm saying. I do think it's both and, where like obviously something triggered this group to go after them, but then again, like
yeah,
I said, like you have these stacks upon stacks of like I don't agree with that, and then I don't agree with that, and then I don't, you know what I mean? So like I don't see I feel for the people who are in the room the most out of anybody who's here, because like I think the pastor, if those things are true, I think he brought it upon himself. But at the same time, I would also go against some of the protesters and the way and the methodology that they use to follow people out, to address children, to all of that stuff. So I think the most innocent people in this, and I use that word loosely because like I said, you don't know how complicit they were, but we don't know. And so like the most innocent in all of this were the people who were just going to church that day. And you know, there was an interview Don Lemon did with a guy who's walking out, and he's you know, Don is asking him all these questions, and don't you believe this, and aren't you a good, you know, like these really slanted questions. And the guy's like, like I'm so out of it right now. I don't even want to do this interview. I just want to go home. Like it just, and to me, that to me is the biggest bummer of it, because like they never asked to be put in that position. And so I think that's where I would say what I said earlier, which is like, it's a shame that these people went to church that day, and because of decisions that were made by their leadership, their pastor, and the decisions and the methodology of these protesters, this service got disrupted. That sucks. And
I do
so,
think I think many would critique your perspective there. Or sorry, did you want to finish? I didn't realize you were still
no, I
talking.
think
If you wanted to conclude that.
that's what I'm saying.
Uh, no, I was just going to say, I think a critique of what you're saying though would be that you didn't mention any of the people that ICE are going after, right? Because I think that's part of the narrative too,
Oh
of
no.
like to say I'm just to be clear, I'm not saying this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just trying to like I like these kind of meta conversations about like the narrative. I would
Yeah.
have to think about whether I agree with this or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think many people would hear you say that and say like the thing you got bummed out about the most was the people in the church, but what about the people being detained by ICE? Because
Yeah.
that's in totality of this, and so shouldn't that be the thing that bums you
You
out
could
most? And
you could
that's just a
walk and chew
respectful challenge.
for sure, but you can walk and chew gum is what I is the way that I would respond to that. Like I can also be upset about those things.
Sure, I think the thing is though it's so in context that it's all together. I think if you say like walk and chew gum, it almost sounds like it's separate, but it's all part of the same narrative. So if you're like I think someone else would restructure that sentence as like, I'm really bummed about what happened to the people in the church for sure. That, you know, it's a shame that happened because their leader was like an ICE knucklehead. But the
Mm-hmm.
people I feel bad for, or like the biggest current problem, or maybe an equally as big problem at the very least, are all the people that ICE are detaining and Renee Good dying or something like that.
Yeah. I don't. I like I said, I don't think that that is like, if somebody's gonna be upset at that, whatever. I guess that's the way I would see it, because like I don't think that me making a statement talking about the specific situation negates anything on my perspective of the larger context. I get what you're saying. I understand. I'm just not as, and maybe this is to a fault, but I'm just not as careful with my phrasing on things like that. Like, I would address it when that conversation came up. So if somebody asked like, "Hey, well, what about this?" Well, okay, let's talk about that. But I don't. Yeah, like, yeah,
Okay. Yeah. I just think it's kind of, like I said, just as a respectful challenge. I think it's kind of coming across as not directly but indirectly dismissive of someone who might think like, well, yeah, it sucks that they got really, honestly, really exactly what Armstrong said, which is that if you're, to put it bluntly, like she did, if you're more concerned about what happened there than at ICE,
yeah.
then that might be a problem for you. Narrative
I think you can be concerned about both. And like I said,
equally.
I mean,
Do you think it?
like I said,
Well, like here's the direct question, and
okay,
again, it's just a respectful challenge.
yeah.
Like, do you think it's more like which one is worse? The fact that Renee Good got shot, or the fact that the protesters, or the fact that the church members had their service ended? Like there's like a correct answer to this,
Yeah. Well, so here's the thing. I think
Oh, come on, there can't be. There's got to be a direct answer to this one.
no, there is, if you would let me.
Okay.
I have a
All right. All right. All right.
I have
I'll lay
a
off.
I think objectively it's the Renee Good situation.
Okay.
So point blank period there. I also know my tendencies and my bias as a role as a pastor and things, to where that resonates with me, not just as much, but more than probably another person who would answer that question. Does that make sense? That's what I'm trying to, that's why I'm
Say that
that's why
again. It resonates with you personally.
it resonates with the church protest resonates with me as a pastor more closely than somebody else. I'm not saying that's not, I'm saying I recognize my own bias as a church leader, as a pastor, to say this situation also sucks probably more than some other person you would ask that question to. But if you're
Sure. So
asking me like, but if you're asking me like objectively, of course, it's the fallout of like somebody dying, right?
Yeah,
Of
and that's
course.
what I'm trying to get at. And
Yeah.
again, I'm not like, I know we have debates and I know we have challenges
Yeah,
where
for sure.
it can be kind of gruesome to get through these
No, absolutely.
analytical conversations of what's being said and what people mean. But I think it's important. But genuinely, there, you know, I view that as an opportunity for you to make yourself look better, which I think my questions actually helped that at the end of the day,
Well,
because I think if we would have left it earlier, it may have sounded worse than it was
for sure. And
for you.
like I said, the hesitation was because there's the objective answer and there's the fallout of like somebody losing their life. But also I recognize my own tendencies to say I probably care about this more than like an average person would. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean,
For
because
sure.
this happens all the time with like a ton of aspects in your life, right? Like if you ask me what's worse, you know, children getting bombed in the Middle East or my brother dying of cancer, it's
Mm-hmm.
like, well, if I had to pick one, the right moral decision, if like, so there's some genie that made me pick one,
Yeah, yeah.
is it would probably be more ethical to say like, well, my brother has to die of cancer because I'm not going to kill thousands of children.
Yeah.
But then if you ask me like which one's going to make you feel more personally sad initially without any thought process,
That's exactly
it's
it.
like, well, yeah, it's my brother, because that's natural. That's a natural human instinct.
Yeah.
So I know what you mean. And I actually
Yeah.
think this is one of my favorite philosophical thought experiments. Actually, you probably heard me say this last night, so I don't need to repeat this. But did you hear me say this? It was the one about like if you push your family or another member's
Yeah.
family.
Yeah, that was
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. No,
yeah. So
that was
it's one of those
interesting.
situations.
Well, and like I said, that's
Yeah,
where the hesitation comes because I think like for me personally, like I can objectively look at a situation as being worse, but then I can also go, man, I know me and I know my situation, and I'm
yeah,
really tight with this. I could imagine myself more in a situation of a church protest than I can in the situation of Renee Good, those kind of things, like the empathy, sympathy type stuff, you know.
yeah, for
So
sure.
so that's where the hesitation came from. It wasn't like, oh, this is a really hard answer.
No, I get it. I get it. And yeah.
Yep,
I understand. I get it. I get it.
for sure.
And that's the only, and that's why the reason I was pushing so hard of like, no, answer this now,
Yeah.
is because it is kind of it. There is like a kind of yes or no answer to it, and I know some people will kind of dance around it. So I think sometimes there's like I feel a need to be like, come on, this is like a yes or no, but also, you know, you wanted me to lay off, so I laid off, and it was fine. So
Yeah.
all good.
We got there.
But we got there. We got there.